Hello, I'm John Marshall Roberts, author of The Voice Code and Igniting Inspiration. I'm an applied behavioral scientist. I help people find their voice so that they can change the world doing what they love. Now, doesn't that sound like fun? And it is possible, but there's some things you need to know, okay? And there's actually a lot you need to know. And having paid my dues over many years, I've figured out the science of how I can help you get there a lot quicker. Today, I want to talk about communication. Let me ask you, do you ever feel frustrated because you have ideas that you're trying to share? Maybe there's a cause that you believe in. You want to solve the climate crisis or protect animals from abuse or some other cause. Maybe there's governmental or political affiliations that you have. Something that you really care about in your heart, but when you try to share it, other people just seem closed-minded and unreceptive, and it doesn't matter how rational you are, they still won't listen. If so, then I'm going to be your best friend for the next few minutes because I'm going to show you a step-by-step process that works. If you think about the greatest communicators in history, people who brought a message to a polarized world and were able to somehow be lifted to greatness and achieve amazing feats with a message that others had failed miserably, perhaps trying to say in different words. What is it that made them so powerful? Well, my research has revealed a simple four-step process that underlies all extraordinary feats of communication genius. And this process can be understood simply through the acronym LUCK. Step one is they listen for the inspiration. They listen, first of all, for their own inspiration, what it is that they're here to bring to the world. And then once they know what that is, they listen to others and what lights them up. Once you listen for inspiration, the next step is you need to get good at understanding the resistance. Understanding and resolving not only other people's resistance towards your ideas, but also dissolving first and foremost your own resistance towards them, including them and inviting them into your vision, even if they differ dramatically from what it is that you believe. The next step is C, call to imagine. Now, a lot of times we like to call people to action. Ultimately, that's where we want to go. But a secret that a lot of people don't realize is that no one's going to take action until you stoke their imagination. So the call to imagine step is where we invite people to embrace and imagine the idea of a world where whatever their resistance is, whatever their dilemma is that they're currently facing, where that no longer exists. And then once you've managed to make that call, K in the process is keep listening, right? You keep listening. You don't just call someone to imagine and to action and then just go and move on your merry way. You want to keep listening and listening for whatever other resistance might come up, right? Cycle back to L and then to U, understanding resistance, and then to calling to imagine again, and then keep listening and then listen, right? So you've got a cycle here, a cycle of luck. The ability to listen for inspiration, understand the resistance, call to imagine, and then keep listening is the cyclical, natural process whereby when we engage people, we can gradually help them transcend old ways of thinking and being and embrace radically new ideas. Now, we're not the first people to want to change the world. And the truth is, most people who have tried this have failed. And I would argue that they did so by usually failing miserably on these first two steps. Listen for inspiration, understand the resistance. See, most people are listening when they're talking, especially to cynics and people who don't get their message, they're listening for opposition. They're listening for evidence that the other person doesn't get them, right? Instead of listening for what that other person aspires to be. This is a powerful misstep and a powerful shift to make when you're engaging others. Who are you going to be more receptive to? Someone who is listening to you as some sort of a them that they've got to overcome, and you can feel that, right? or someone who sincerely wants to know who you are and what you care about? What is it that you want? What is it that would make your heart sing? What are you great at? If I can talk to you, and if I can really ask you questions and get you talking, looking for that light in your eyes, and just let that light build, then what happens is we create a sacred space together, a space where you begin to light up and be open to new possibilities. From that place now, barriers dissolve and there's a sense of unity and shared purpose that begins to emerge. That sense of unity and shared purpose is the foundation for the whole process of what we might call transformational communication, transformational leadership. But it's not enough, okay? So once we listen and we begin to open that space with another person, right? First of all, to do that, I want to also point out, it's not enough just to listen to the other person. We have to also be authentic and know what it is we care about. Because unless we have an authentic purpose rooted in something higher, something that is truly of service, then we're still listening just to try to manipulate. So I want to get that out there. Each of these steps has an internal and an external component. Now, because I want to keep this video down under 4 hours, I'm going to focus from here on out mainly on the external, and know that there's going to be videos where I cover both the inner and the outer game, because both are very necessary if we want to truly master this and get great. But going back, we have step one, right? Listen for inspiration. Get the other person really starting to talk about what lights them up. Ask them questions that lead to that. And it's really not that hard if you genuinely care. If you're sitting at someone's office, you might ask them, "Oh, I see your kid plays croquet or whatever." I used to play that when I was a kid. Anything, right? What lights them up? Get them talking and asking questions. Open up that space with the L, right? The listen. Then there's a very natural pivot that happens as we move into U, which is understanding the resistance. Now this is the hardest step of all three. If you get this, you can change the world. If you don't, when you get to the C, which is the call to action, call to imagine, they're not going to be with you. So the U is where we shift now and we stand in their shoes. We take empathy on them, given their worldview, and we look at what are the frustrations that they have in their own terms to bringing that aspiration that you got in the L step, listening, right? What are their biggest barriers that they perceive as existing that are keeping them from really bringing their vision into the world? Okay? Understand the resistance. Now, in an upcoming video, I'm going to be able to get very technical with you on this. But let me tell you, perhaps the biggest and most practical discovery behind what I call the voice code, the map of the research mind map that I'm writing about and using to help people, right? The biggest discovery is what I call the DPM, or the dynamic polarity matrix. Now, that sounds fancy, and it is kind of fancy, but just consider this, okay? People seem to have a lot of different problems, right? Some people believe they have problems with their marriage, but their work's okay. Some people have problems at their work, their marriage is okay. Some people are good at both, but their weight's not working. Consider, though, that all of these problems, however they show up, can be understood very simply once we understand that there's a simple, natural template, a dynamic structure that underlies perception, right? And that creates in people's lives these sort of recurring dilemmas, either or dilemmas. And what I want to teach you in coming videos is how to use this, what I call dynamic polarity matrix, to quickly discover what people's resistance is and figure out how to really stand in their shoes and get them to open to the possibility of a life beyond what they now perceive as their current limitations. Now, the dynamic polarity matrix suggests that there are 4 basic needs that drive all thinking pretty much in the developed world, right? The need for security or safety, which often relates to money, which is counterbalanced in a dynamic polarity with the need for change or progress, which is often associated what we're trying to call people to do when we have these types of conversations. Now, these 2 needs are there's like 2 rubber bands, and we all need both of them, but each of us tends to frame our reality choosing one over the other. So if I'm a change advocate, I'll tend to call for change, but sometimes I'll overlook my own need and other people's need for security. If I'm really security minded, then I'll tend to do the opposite. Okay, so we have those two needs, and then on another, what you might, I guess, the y-axis, right, or x-axis, I guess it would be, we have two other needs, which are the need for autonomy, to be our own person, and the need for connection or intimacy with others. People who tend to choose connection in a given moment or as a given sort of stage of development, they tend to overlook their own need for autonomy and repress that. Whereas people who choose autonomy and success, personal success, tend to do so by overlooking the opposing need for connection. So these four needs, security versus change, autonomy versus connection, they form a matrix that leads us to predictable dilemmas in our lives. Okay? So when we understand that basic matrix, we can start to look at people's thinking and quickly see how they're framing issues in a way that is castrating their ability to solve opposing needs. So just to give one example, let's say that I'm an environmental activist and I really am passionately embedded in solving the need for change and the need for human connection. And let's say I'm trying to raise money from someone who's more of what we call an achiever. It's an achiever worldview, which is the opposite worldview, which is more about establishing personal autonomy, right? And security, money. Well, this is like oil and vinegar, these two worldviews. One we call the explorer, the other one we call the achiever, right? And they're both valid worldviews, but they're looking at the world from exactly opposite points of view, right? And in our culture today, you'll see this a lot in the dramatic dialogue between the liberal base and the Donald Trump lovers, right? That's those two worldviews in action. But see what's going on here is that for the advocate, right, they're framing everything in terms of change and autonomy, and they're trying to talk to somebody who sees things completely differently, whose aspirations are formed by the desire for security, the competing needs, security and autonomy. Right? Now, to be an effective at getting through to someone like that, if you're in that camp, right? If that's what you want to do, when you get through listening, right, you move into you, which is understanding. What you want to do is step in their shoes with compassion and really start to see like what it must be like for them, right? What is their dilemma? Their dilemma from their point of view is that environmentalism and all this seems to be in this need to be a hippie or whatever it is, right, to sort of like open up and sing "We Are the World," right, is really feels like a threat to their need for security and autonomy, right? So they're viewing you as a threat. Now, here's the thing, okay? Here's what I really need you to get. We all need all four needs, right? The real us emerges at the center point when we integrate all four needs. So when you're talking to someone who seems like a cynical, closed-minded achiever, don't believe the hype. Understand what's really going on here is that they have repressed their need for connection, meaning that they're lonely inside. They're not going to tell you that necessarily, but there's a deep need for that that's unmet, and they've repressed their need for change, and now it's showing up as scary. So it's a scary world of change, right? Understand that their negative relationship to those needs comes from frustration, right? They've repressed those needs and decided that they can't have it all. And now they're projecting a world out there of tree-hugging hippies who don't get the bottom line, right, and who are mean to them, right, and also a world that's changing so fast they don't know if they can keep up. This is all about them and all about their shadows. So what you want to do when you get to you in the luck cycle with someone like that is you want to leverage that aspirational connection that you had from listening and start to stand in their shoes and start to really get them to open up about their desire for intimacy, their desire for connection, their desire to be one with the future, the frustrations that have come from repressing those needs. I hope you're dialing here because you see how deep this is. If you can get to know your audience so well, whether it's a specific person or a large campaign like what Obama did in terms of the liberal base in 2008, right? Get to know them so well that you can decipher those hidden dilemmas and then, right, get them to really know that you know that so much that they wake up when you talk, right? You are playing their song. They feel that possibility in your message because you stand for and. You're not standing against them. You're standing for the unification, the truth. Now, when you engage them often through nonverbals, you're going to bring a sense of possibility, which invites them to open up further and further to even recognize the suffering that they weren't aware of before. And when you can do that, you're getting up there with Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Lincoln and Barack Obama. See? This is what they did. And what you'll do then is develop that energy of possibility, hold that space with non-judgment and love, then see. You call them to imagine a world in which, for example, given our example, they no longer need to sacrifice their desire to be connected to others in order to make a living and be their own person, where they can be part of the future rather than trying to hunker down and resist change, right? And when you do that call to imagine, what you're doing is calling them inside to imagine themselves as a new person, a person capable of satisfying all their needs and not compromising. But you do it in the name of a vision, a practical vision of some way that they can take action that would represent this for them in that particular moment. All right, so Barack Obama did it with his call, not for a red America or a blue America, but a red, white, and blue America. See? And what did he do? He understood the dilemma. He said, right, you understand the resistance, understand the dilemma. He said, the only enemy is cynicism, right? He told liberal-based people that cynicism was the only enemy, which forced them to look inside and release their own inner cynic in a way that resonated with their values and which ultimately allowed them to recapture some of their unmet needs in the area of being their own person, feeling autonomous, and feeling that they could have security within, regardless of what happens without. See? So that's just one example, but you look at any great speech, whether it's Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech or on a much smaller scale, great TED speeches. Any great speech or conversation that leads someone to change is going to go through these steps, right? It's going to be born of these steps. And once we do that call, what do? We keep listening. We keep repeating the cycle over and over again. This is how we become a force of nature for change. Can you see it? I hope you can. Now, it gets pretty deep. And in coming weeks, I'm going to talk about how specifically you might do this with the believer worldview, which is often the Republican base. They're sometimes the old guard, and they tend to have a strong religious preference that the liberal types and progressives don't usually appreciate at all, right? How do we do that? How would we do that with them? And then, the Republican, fiscal Republican side of things is often what we call the achiever, the Donald Trump camp. How would we do that with them? With the liberal base, right? It could be kind of pig-headed sometimes, right? How do we do that with them? And then the progressive liberals, which are often the innovators, Silicon Valley types, pathfinders. How would we do that with them? Understand something here. First of all, if you've read my book, Igniting Inspiration, it's a good one to revisit. And if you haven't, pick it up, okay? Because it talks about these worldviews and how they evolve. So there is an evolutionary process happening here. But what I'd like you to consider here, and this is something that wasn't available in our research when I first wrote that book, okay? These four worldviews are all part of one plane. They're part of a whole. And the way to think about them is not as hierarchically better or worse, but as part of, say, one elephant, right? They're all part of one whole elephant, and each one is seeing it from a different point of view. And where you want to be to get great at this process is you ultimately want to stand internally for satisfying all four needs. Find out what you're here for, what your calling is, and then stand right in the middle of what I call the DPM, that matrix I told you about, where you're satisfying all four needs at once. You refuse to compromise your security. You refuse to compromise your sense of autonomy. You refuse to compromise your desire for connection, and you refuse to compromise your need for change. You hold all four together at once, which means that you no longer judge any one of these four worldviews, nor do you prefer them. Now, you may not want to do this. This may sound crazy to you, and it's not necessary to use this process, but I want you to really have a big vision here. I want you to start thinking big about what's possible for you. Because get this, when you're able to understand each of these four different quadrants, right, these different worldviews and perspectives, without choosing one over the other, it's like a pyramid where the eye opens at the top. You now up level to a new level where you're able to see what's going on without being embedded in the muck. And when you stand at that higher level, you're actually at a higher worldview, which we call the visionary worldview, which we now understand what it is. The visionary worldview comes from the unification of those four needs I talked about, which brings the evolution across all those other four worldviews. Now, am I making sense? Maybe not. You can read my books if you want to go deeper. Here's what I want you to get for now. Stand for yourself as one with your audience and refuse to judge people just because they don't get you, right? Instead, I want you to listen for their inspiration. I want you to practice understanding their dilemma, both from a clinical point of view, like what is their dilemma, but also from their point of view in a way that will just open them up to begin to share that. And then practice calling people to imagine both and then just practice keeping that listening going. Don't shut off. If you can practice this today with the next person you talk to, practice it with your mom, practice it at work. This process, the luck process, is powerful, and that's a good place to start. And in the coming weeks, I'll give you more and more to work with. But rest assured, if you commit to listening with inspiration and listening for inspiration, understanding your own resistance, understanding their resistance, calling yourself to imagine a both and then calling others to join you in that, and then continuing to listen inside and continuing to listen to others after you've called them so that you can keep mastering the cycle, you'll have no limitations whatsoever. The world will be your oyster. In fact, the world is your oyster. The only problem that we have is that we've fallen into the belief of old limitations, which will quickly get uprooted as you give yourself to mastering the art of transformational leadership and communication to inspire change. So thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to giving you more and more tools to empower you to win hearts and minds on behalf of worthy causes that you feel in your heart to extend to the world. Oh yeah, please subscribe to this channel. Pass this video along to friends who might be frustrated and could benefit from it. And if you haven't already, go read my books.